Hey, what's up guys? So in this video, we're going to be taking a look at the new Uniden R8. Now, this has been my daily driver for the past 4 months or so. And overall, I've really been liking this detector. So much so that even though I'm now done with my beta testing and everything I need to do to get ready for this review here for you guys, I'm actually going to continue running the R8 as my go-to detector. And the R8, it's now available for pre-order. Now, for the first batch of detectors coming in, just a quick heads up, there's going to be a very limited number of them available. And so for those of you who know you already want to get an R8, even without watching this video, go ahead and pause this video and head on over to vortexradar.com/R8. I'll put a link for you down in the video description as well, and go ahead and get your pre-order in. For those of you guys who missed the first round of pre-orders, no worries, you can still get one as well. It's just going to take you a little bit longer to get your detector in. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with the detector yet, before watching this video, make sure you first watch my video introducing the R8 itself. That video is going to go over all the changes and improvements here with this new detector, especially all the improvements over the R7. In this video, I want to go over my experiences actually having run the detector for the past couple months. I want to go over test results, long-range performance, Spectre immunity, false alert filtering. We're going to go over the design of the detector, basically taking a look at what it's like actually using this detector in practice. And if you'd prefer to read over all this information instead of watching the video, I'm also going to link to my R8 review article down in the video description as well. And so with that said, let's go ahead and take a close look here at the new Uniden R8. So diving right into things, fundamentally the Uniden R8, it's essentially a Uniden R7, but with the same changes and improvements that were brought over to the Uniden R4. The R8 is essentially an Aero version of the R4. Now, starting off with the design of the detector, the first thing is they've actually moved the mute button here to the face of the detector, and I really like this mute button placement. It makes it much easier to press the mute button as needed when you're driving around with the detector. I've always found it kind of awkward with the R7 to press the mute button on the side of the detector, and it's actually a really nice improvement here to have it on the front. It feels much more natural to mute a detector by going like this than it does by pressing the side button on the R7, which always felt a little awkward to do hand gestures like that. Now, that said, there are some trade-offs with the new design. You'll notice taking a look at the two detectors, the R8, it's now taller on the face with the new buttons under the display. And making the detector taller like this does have a couple trade-offs. The first thing is we've noticed the buttons here on top of the detector are going to be a little bit higher. And so for those of you who are upgrading from the R7, if you have maybe a permanent mount, if you've got the detector mounted up high by the rearview mirror, it's possible for the buttons to actually now be pressing up against the headliner. Or you may not have enough room to actually get your fingers in to press the buttons. You may have to adjust them out. The other thing to note is the rear laser sensor. It's now actually being blocked by the front of the detector. Now that said, while that's technically true, in practice it's kind of a non-issue. I've actually done a video recently talking about rear laser detection, how it's not actually important in practice, but it is true that this new design does block the rear laser sensor. Then in terms of build quality, I do find the button feel to be a little bit better here with the R8 than on the R7. For the case itself, it still is kind of a plasticky design. It doesn't feel quite as solid as, say, the Redline 360C or the V1 Gen 2. But honestly, it still feels fine in practice. I don't have an issue with it, but it does feel a little bit more plasticky than some of the others. Next, moving on to performance, this is also one of the big key changes here with the R8. Like the R4, Uniden has added a dual LNA design to improve the sensitivity of the detector, plus they've upgraded the condenser lens here in front of the main horn, which also helps with performance. Now, I've got a full article available on my website that goes over all the test results and how the detector compares to all the key competitors, including the R7, and in this video, I just want to quickly go over some of the main differences. Now, compared to the R7, I found that the R8 does in fact outperform it on 33.8, 34.7, 35.5, and K-band. And so these changes that Uniden has introduced does in fact improve range. Compared to the Redline 360C or the V1 Gen 2, I found that the results vary. Sometimes the R8 would win, sometimes the Redline, sometimes the V1. A lot of it depends on what radar gun is being used or what settings are being used, but overall, all three of the detectors are very good performers. And so while the R8 does not sweep the competition, and I haven't found it to be the best performing radar detector across the board, it's definitely one of the top performing detectors available on the market. Next, another key aspect of performance is not just long range, but also reactivity, kind of reacting to brief alerts. And this is also another difference that I have noticed separates the R8 from the competition. If you take a look at something like the Redline 360C, for example, that detector is kind of slow on Ka band unless you really segment it down to just like segments 2, 5, and 8. That'll speed up the detector on Ka band. On K band, the detector is still pretty slow to alert. The V1 Gen 2, it's lightning quick at alerting to Ka band, even scanning all Ka frequencies, but again, it's going to be slow on K band due to the additional false alert filtering. This isn't true with the Uniden detectors. I found the Uniden to be very responsive on Ka band and responsive on K-band even with the filters enabled. Additionally, in my testing, I've also found that even with tons of filtering enabled on the R8 to cut down on false alerts, you still get really long range, which again isn't necessarily true of some of the other detectors. And so what I found with the R8, and one of the things I really like about it, is with this detector you're going to be getting a long range performance, a very responsive detector, and you can do this while having the different false alert filters upgraded. That combination is not available from some of the other top tier detectors, and it's that performance in terms of range, reactivity, and filtering all in one detector is something that I really like here with the R8 and gives me a lot of confidence here running the detector. I feel like I'm not having to make some of the same trade-offs that I am running some other detectors. Additionally, in terms of signal presentation, I also find that the R8 does a better job of progressively ramping up in signal strength as I get closer to the source. The Redline 360C, for example, can do some weird things to where it alerts really strongly well before I get close to the radar gun. Additionally, with the Escort, sometimes it does things to where like the signal strength kind of drops off and then goes silent and then resumes alerting strongly. Kind of weird stuff. I don't necessarily see the same issues here with the R8, and so I like the signal presentation a little bit better here with the Uniden. Next, taking a look at false alert filtering, that's also something that I've overall been liking here with the R8 with a few key exceptions. First off, taking a look at BSM filtering, I find that overall the R8 is actually a pretty quiet detector. For example, if I go for maybe a 2-hour road trip on the highway, I'll get maybe 5 BSM falses or so, and that's not bad in my opinion. Overall, I found the detector to be pretty quiet. Now, as far as the different cars that can trigger the detector to false alert, I've noticed Mazda CX-5s, some Hondas and Acuras, some Cadillacs, some Jeeps, and some Chryslers. And besides just the built-in K-band filter in the R8, there's a couple settings available to help cut down on those false alerts. First off, you've got 2 different K-block features, just like the R7, so a filter for 24.199 plus minus 5 megahertz, and then a second one for 24.168 plus minus 2 megahertz. I run my K-block setup just to mute weak alerts, and so I still get alerted to stronger alerts, say police radar guns, and I found that with the weak setting, it cuts out a ton of false alerts from your Hondas and Acuras and Jeeps and Chryslers, etc. It doesn't cut out all of them, especially if they're transmitting outside of that frequency range, but it does seem to help address the vast majority of them out on the road. Additionally, when the R8 does go off to a BSM false, it's typically going to be a weak alert, which I really like, and so the signal presentation doesn't make me want to panic stomp the brakes or anything, thinking I just got nailed by instant on, so I like the signal presentation in that regard. Additionally, there's auto mode, which is a new feature here for the R8 over the R7 that helps quiet the detector down a little bit more as well, especially when you're driving around town. Basically, the idea with auto mode is you set a certain speed threshold, and if you're driving above that speed threshold, the detector is going to be running in full sensitivity, basically like running in highway mode. And so this is going to give you the longest range possible. On the other hand, if you slow down below the speed threshold, say you're driving around the city, that's going to reduce the sensitivity of the detector on X and K band to help cut back on some of the false alerts. It's basically running the detector in city mode for you automatically, just switching between city mode and highway mode without you having to do it manually. And one thing I really like about this is even running the R8 in city mode or in auto mode at lower speeds, I found the range is still actually really good. In fact, still better than the V1 Gen 2 running in advanced logic mode. And so if you want more aggressive filtering here in the R8, again, you're still going to be getting really good performance regardless. Additionally, TSF, we've also noticed in beta testing, can further help cut back on false alerts. We do notice that enabling TSF does cut down on range, but due to the improvements with BSM filtering, I do like to run the detector with TSF on. Finally, another trick that you've got is the MRCD detection capabilities. Just like previous Uniden detectors, we've noticed that if you turn on the MRCD detection, for whatever reason, it helps to cut down the false alerts that you'll see from Mazda CX-5s. That said, if you do enable MRCD detection, especially if you don't necessarily need it, you're going to get some other MRCD falses, which then you'll have to address with some of the MRCD specific filters like MRCD low speed muting or MRCD lockouts, but you can still work around some of that. And so overall, depending on the settings, it seems like you can get a pretty quiet experience. It seems like the trick is TSF on, auto mode, and MRCD on to really help cut back on the false alerts. I'll go over all this kind of stuff in my R8 settings guide, especially once we get the final firmware and everything, and then I get all that put together. Now, compared to the R7, it seems like the R8's BSM filtering, it's still the same, but with the addition of auto mode, that does seem to help quiet down the R8, and so overall the experience is going to be very similar to what you'll see with the Uniden R4. Next, I want to move on and talk about automatic GPS lockouts. And unfortunately, auto lockouts with the R8 they're still broken. You're going to see all the same issues that we've got with the R7 or the R4. It seems like the Uniden engineers basically just copied and pasted the code for the auto lockouts, and so all the same issues that we had with the other detectors carry over here to the R8. And what I've noticed driving around with it is the auto lockouts technically do work, but just not very well. Here's what I mean by that. One issue seems to be that the GPS lockout radius is a little bit too small, and so as you're driving towards a false alert, you may actually get the alert initially until you get closer to the alert for that lockout to kick in. Additionally, I've also seen situations to where I can literally drive past the same door openers for months and they will never get automatically locked out. I've seen the R8 automatically lock out a blind spot false that was driving by. Lockouts are only supposed to work against stationary sources. You don't want them working against moving sources. And I've also seen weird things where an auto lockout may be created, but then the detector continues alerting normally after it locked out that signal. It doesn't actually mute that signal and gray it out on screen. And so in practice, I've noticed a number of issues here with the auto lockouts on the R8. Now, the workaround that I've been relying on is basically just to manually lock out signals for the situations where the auto lockout, maybe the radius is too small, I'll just create a second lockout as needed, or if the auto lockout never kicks in, I'll just create it manually. That works. I mean, it just takes a little bit of time to manually create the lockouts, but if you have a detector with auto lockouts, I want it to just automatically lock out all the detectors for me, hands-free, without me having to do the manual lockouts. Now, I know Uniden, they're working on the auto lockouts, but honestly, they've had a lot of time to work on this with the R7 and the R4, and unfortunately, it looks like the same issues are going to be carrying over here to the R8. And again, I really hope Uniden's engineers finally fully tackle this issue, because in my opinion, it's one of the biggest weaknesses here with the R8. Next, moving on, let's take a look at photo radar detection. So the R8 is designed to detect the MRCD, the MRCT, and GATSO-based photo radar systems. Now, I don't have any of those here in my area, so I'm not able to test this personally, but Dukes, who's up in Edmonton, Canada, has a lot of MRCD, and he's actually got some really good information to share about the R8. In his testing, compared to the R7, he's actually finding that the R8 offers at least double or quadruple the range against MRCD. And that can be really useful against MRCD photo radar trucks, which are really low powered and give you very short detection ranges. Here's a quick clip that Duke shared that gives you an idea of what the R8 is like against MRCD. So definitely enough warning here to slow down and avoid a ticket as needed. Now, in terms of false alerts against MRCD, he's mentioned that the filtering seems to be very comparable between the R7 and the R8, and that's been my experience as well. I've turned it on, as I mentioned before, for the Mazda CX-5 falses, and again, I've noticed that the false alerts are pretty similar here with the R8 compared to some of Uniden's other detectors. And finally, I also really like the fact that with Uniden's detectors, when you approach an MRCD source, you are going to get the directional arrows. You won't get that with the Redline 360C. It just flashes all of the arrows at once. And then the V1 Gen 2, it's not actually designed for photo radar detection in the first place. And so I actually really like the improved range that we're seeing here with the R8 against the MRCD. Plus, I like the fact that you do get the directional arrows, which can be really helpful when you're driving around in the city and you're trying to figure out where the source is. Now, in terms of the arrow behavior, they're not perfect, I found, but they do work pretty well. Sometimes the arrows will flip right as you pass the threat, and this seems to be especially true at lower speeds. And in other situations, they'll actually take a few seconds to flip after you pass the source, and this seems to be especially true when you're driving at higher speeds. I've also noticed situations sometimes where you're driving towards a radar source and the arrows will maybe flip earlier, they'll flip sideways before you get to the source, typically due to reflections. Now, I know reflections can trip up pretty much any detector with arrows, but here's an example of this happening driving down the road. There's actually a Washington State Patrol trooper driving the opposite direction towards me on the highway, and you'll notice that as I'm approaching the officer, sometimes the arrows will flip to the side and then resume facing forward again. And then shortly after I passed the officer and he was now behind me, the arrows would flip backwards and point behind me as well. And so while the arrows in the R8, they're not perfect, I definitely do find them to be helpful overall. Next up, what about RDD immunity? What about a detector that's stealth and undetectable by radar detector detectors? Well, I did some testing with my R8 against both the Spectre 3 and the Spectre Elite. I've got a full video on that as well that you can check out. I'll link to that down in the video description too. But in short, what I found is that the results can be kind of variable here with the R8. Against both the Spectre 3 and the Spectre Elite, I found that there are some situations where you can drive by and the officer will get no alert from the Spectre. On the other hand, sometimes they'll drive by and they will get a little bit of an alert. Sometimes they'll get a pretty obvious alert, and so it can be pretty clear where the radar detector car is. And so overall, I've noticed that while there are some situations where the R8 is indeed stealth, it's not consistently and reliably stealth. Now, having a detector that's undetectable by radar detectors isn't something that I personally need, so it doesn't matter to me, but if it's something that is of critical importance to you, you may want to consider another detector, again, like the Redline 360C or the V1 Gen 2, or another detector that, well, really is stealth against the different Spectres. Now, as far as Bluetooth, the R8 has Bluetooth built in, just like the R4, but the Bluetooth capability is currently disabled in the detector, and there's no Bluetooth apps for me to test during the beta testing, so I can't report anything as far as that. The only thing that I can share is Farius on RDF. He's the guy who's developed Highway Radar. His app currently supports the V1 Gen 2 and the DS1, and he's also adding support for both the R4 and the R8. Now, he's still in the development phase, adding the support for the Uniden detectors, but with the other detectors, it's going to allow you to do things like change settings, build in settings profiles that you can push as needed, etc. Next, as far as the Blendmount, I know a lot of you guys have asked about this in the previous videos. If you have an R7, it turns out the R8 is compatible with the exact same Blendmount clip that was used for the R7. And so if you're upgrading from the R7, it's a snap to just pop off the old detector and pop on the new one. And if you're wanting to purchase a Blendmount for your R8 and you don't already have a clip, you can just purchase the one for the R7. It's the exact same clip, and I found it's compatible with the R8 as well. I'll put a link down in the video description to where you can pick one of those up as well. Now, speaking of the R7, how does the R8 compare to it overall? Is it a better detector? Yeah, of course. I mean, it's the newer detector. It's got longer range and better false alert filtering and even more useful features. Now, is it worth it getting the R8? I think that really always, as anything, it kind of comes down to you. I see them to be sort of two different detectors. I see like the R7 is going to be the better bang for the buck. It's one of the best detectors that you can buy around the $500 price point with good range, good performance, nice feature set, GPS built in. You don't have to pair a phone to add the GPS functionality. It's been like one of the go-to choices for radar detectors. The R8, I see that more of a detector for people who want like the flagship version, the very best version. You're paying an extra $200, so of course it's a more expensive detector, but it's going to be the better detector. Now, between the two detectors, I prefer the R8 for three primary reasons. I like it for the longer range, I like it for the better false alert filtering, and I like it for the front-facing mute button. Now, the auto mode sensitivity, I don't know if that's going to be added to the R7 via firmware update or if they're going to want to keep it as an exclusive feature for just the R8, but it is a nice improvement here with the newer detector. The R8 has Bluetooth built in. We'll have to see kind of what support we get down the line for that, but that's not something that's even activated at this time, even though that is a difference. There's other differences as well that honestly aren't really important to me, but I know they are going to be important to some others. For example, you've got the photo radar differences. The R8 does give you longer range against both the MRCD and the MRCT, plus it adds support for the GATSO photo radar systems. It's going to add support for Uniden's upcoming wired control pad. It's not available yet, but the R8 is going to support that. Plus Uniden's upcoming laser jammers that they're working on, that is going to be available for the R8, but it's not going to be available for the R7. And so with all that said, overall impressions with the R8, I like the detector overall. I think it's a good pick, and it's why I said at the beginning of the video that even though I'm already done with my testing and everything, I want to continue running it as my go-to daily driver. Now, the detector's not perfect. Again, no detector is. I definitely would like to see further improvement here with the R8, especially with the auto lockouts. But that said, I really like the fact that I can get long-range performance on Ka-band and on K-band. I like the fact that I've got very quick reactivity and responsiveness on both Ka-band and on K-band, and I can do all that while also having my filters activated to get the false alert filtering. Plus, it's not going to cut down range too much the way I see maybe with some other detectors. And so I like it in terms of having a good balance between long range, reactivity, and false alert filtering. The auto lockout issue that I mentioned before, yes, it's kind of annoying, but you can at least work around it just by creating your manual lockouts initially when you first get the detector. The arrows I find to work pretty well overall and are definitely useful. The MRCD improvements are definitely nice for those who need it. It's still not going to be a fully stealth detector, which is not important to me, but I know is important to some others depending on where you drive. And so as an overall package, I'm liking the R8. It's actually going to be replacing the Redline 360C as my go-to daily driver. I like the improved performance as well as the improved ramp up over the Redline 360, and I'm willing to sacrifice the Wi-Fi benefits to get the improved radar detection capabilities. And so yeah, that's my thoughts of the R8. That's my impressions of it, and that's now kind of the pros and cons as well as why I'm switching to it as my daily driver. And so if you want to pick up an R8 as well, again, I'll have a link to it down in the video description. And so, woo! Woo! Yeah, that's it for now. Thanks so much for watching. Hope you're all doing well, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.